So folks, we need to keep an aisle clear here. So if you want to filter into standing room back towards picture books, and if anyone has an open seat, could you raise your hand in case we do have any open seats left? We do not. Okay. Yeah, if you just want to keep an aisle clear all the way back to the stairs, we need to keep an aisle clear. And if you want to just try to find a standing room back in picture books, thank you for your accommodating us. And it got very quiet. We'll start in just a few minutes. Thanks.
Okay, just that. Okay, now shouldn't have. I really thought this was gonna be like. Okay, no, literally, no. Do you want to? I mean, I should. No, you can don't do whatever you want.
Hello. Sorry, am I too loud?
Okay.
Hello, this is amazing. A full house. Thank you all so much for coming. Welcome to the University of Michigan English Creative Writing Subconcentration Reading Part 1. Part 2 is next week. I'm so glad you're all here. I'm Polly Rosenwake. I'm a fiction writer and editor of the Michigan Quarterly Review for Fiction. But more importantly for this evening, I'm the partner of Cody Walker, who would be your proper host. He is the director of the Creative Writing Subconcentration at U of M. And he's been working with the writers that you'll hear tonight all year, Zooming from our basement, deeply engaged with all of their work. And Cody is so sorry not to be able to make it tonight. He had to travel to Maryland last minute to be with his father in his final days. But I know that he's wishing he could be here tonight, and I know he's rooting all of you on. So he specifically requested that our daughter Zia Walker film this, so she's going to be here, maybe getting in your face a little bit with the iPad and trying to capture this for him. So if Cody were here, he would have really great special personalized introductions to each of these 7 gifted writers tonight. I'm sorry I can't offer that because this is the first time I'm meeting them. But I will read each of the bios that the writers wrote for you. I'll read them one at a time before each writer comes up and reads for about 7 minutes. Then we will clap heartily for each reader, and then I'll read the next bio. So the order of readers tonight will be Jessica Kwan, Grace Fabry, Caroline Knight, Francisco Fiore, Nikki Rossiter, Taylor Thorpe, and finally Amelia Ferrante. So that will be our order of readers. So we're about to begin, and I know I'm really excited to get a glimpse into what all the Zooming in our basement has been about, and to celebrate the fantastic work that these creative writing subconcentrators have been doing all year. Honestly, myself, as a writer who has not gotten much writing done lately, I'm jealous of how many pages you all have written in this relatively short amount of time, pages and pages of fiction and poetry that we're going to hear just a little bit of tonight. So congratulations on this great achievement. And finally, I want to thank Literati and the wonderful John Gainier, the events coordinator, for allowing us to have this reading in this beautiful space. I don't know if you know, but Literati is celebrating 10 years in Ann Arbor. It's their 10-year anniversary this weekend. 10 years of this amazing independent bookstore inhabiting this corner at Washington and 4th, and enriching our lives in this town. So we're so happy to be able to be reading here. All right, so our first reader tonight will be Jessica Kwan. Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot your bio. Get down. No, okay. I knew I was going to mess up somehow. All right. Jessica Kwan is a Korean American writer currently studying English, creative writing, and Asian American and Pacific Islander studies at the University of Michigan. Previously, Jessica worked for Michigan Quarterly Review and Detroit Metro Times. Additionally, she served as managing editor of Michigan in Color, the Michigan Daily section by and for people of color. Jessica is a Perry Plus Fellowship finalist and a recipient of 3 Hopwood Awards for fiction, nonfiction, and journalism. Welcome, Jessica.
Do I talk in here? Like this? Okay. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming. Hello. Today I'll be reading a passage from my thesis titled Minor Offenses, a short story anthology centering the lives of Korean and Korean diasporic people. My second reader, Manin Desai, I think is here today. Is he? Okay, if he's not, that's fine, but either way, I'm thankful for the time and care he's given to my writing. The excerpts I've chosen are from a story called In Translation. It skips through time to illustrate a relationship between the narrator, David, and his partner, Aaron. It's organized loosely by shared memories and definitions of Korean words that have no direct translation in English, which David periodically teaches Aaron. 설레다, nervous in a restless way that makes one's heart flutter. I met you in Jeonju. This is where everything seemed to begin, at least for us. My parents were from Jeonju. You suspected your birth parents were as well, and though you had no desire to meet them, you wanted to walk on the cobblestone pathways they may have known. Maybe this was in the interest of self-discovery. In Jeonju, the buildings and trees and even the gray sky seemed to hang low to the ground, and in that way they felt more approachable to you, who, I would soon learn, preferred its quiet, unassuming provinciality to the haughty lifestyle in Seoul. As an internet search of Jeonju evoked images of a village of Hanoks stalled in time, and in the sun, their ridged roofs shone like the indigo ocean. But in reality, most of the city was like a quiet suburb, a Korean suburb being, it seemed to me, a town lacking the kind of glamour and spectacle that loudly proclaims itself while still needing to house more than 500,000 people. We were both juniors on study abroad at Jeonbuk National University. Our cohort was small, 5 people max. K-pop hadn't yet waxed into a global phenomenon, K-BBQ then undiscovered by white folks, and nearly everyone who'd wanted to go to Asia had settled on Tokyo or Osaka, Japan. We landed on a Thursday night, and the next day all of us were to have dinner together in the commissary, a very early dinner given our jet lag. When I arrived, I felt nervous and eager in anticipation of strangers. My excitement dwindled when I started conversing with the people before me. 3 white men, 1 tall, 1 short, and 1 pimply, and 1 Chinese-American woman with an astonishingly harsh side part. She introduced herself as Cindy, and when I asked her why she'd chosen Jeonju, she shrugged. If I do this, I fulfill my language requirement. And then she stuck her earphones in, effectively ending our conversation. I asked the man to my left, the short one, and he gave me a lopsided, somewhat sheepish smirk. Oh, I heard the girls here are nice, not like in America, right? Dinner was a dry and overly sweet bulgogi rice bowl that I found myself staring into as the men made each other's acquaintance and Cindy typed furiously away on her iPhone. And then a young woman walked in calmly. Half an hour into the meal, I could see in her sharp visage that she was probably Korean, the only other one besides me. I watched her movements while trying not to appear like I was staring. She spoke to Mrs. Choi, the supervisor who'd handed us our dinners, standing closely enough that I could hear her. When the woman spoke, it became clear that this wasn't her native language. It was the hesitant yet overly exaggerated Korean of someone who realized its importance only after their tongue had already hardened. Someone who'd skimmed their knowledge off dramas and song lyrics. And then she grabbed her tray from Mrs. Choi, who looked irritated, and walked to our table. She sat in the empty seat between Cindy and the tall one, 2 seats away from me. The guy's conversation stopped. Up close, the woman had a firm, high nose bridge, which collapsed at its end into a downward hook, a wide mouth perpetually turned up at the ends into a lazy non-smile, and eyes set deep into her face, almost sunken in. Her forehead was small, and her cheeks jutted out, odd proportions which I decided were pretty and unique. Her hair was chopped short, grazing her firm, square jaw. That was you. You looked up and faced me. Well, you faced all of us in turns. You smiled, a real smile, and when you did, your mouth stretched even wider until it pulled flesh over your angular cheekbones and brightened your eyes, and you looked younger and softer and confident. And you said, "Sorry, I took a nap and overslept. Hey, I'm Aaron. I turned this information over in my mouth. Air in, your name and inhalation. Inyan, a bond that was born of fate or destiny. One time I asked you if you would ever, hypothetically, say, want to get married in the future to anyone. You looked up at me, I thought, impassively, and then down at your feet, or perhaps at the ground opening up to us. Can I be totally honest, you said? I nodded, though I really only wanted the truth if your words wouldn't wound me. I didn't. I never did, you said, until I met you. I exhaled then, without even realizing I had drawn breath. You said, I don't know if I'll marry you, but you made me realize there are worse things I could be than married. One afternoon, 4 years into our relationship, we were cooking together. I hated anyone's presence besides me in the kitchen. We'd been living together for several months at that point and usually shared our meals, but on this day, I had a sudden urgent craving for chicken katsu, and you were on your period, had no appetite, and wanted to eat a salad. So though I preferred to cook in solitude, there we stood, stirring and chopping, accommodating one another. I lowered my head when you needed to open the spice cabinet, and you leaned forward when I made to grab chicken thighs from the fridge. We would preface our movements with an excuse me, never sorry, and I liked that. Ours was my first relationship that was like this, respectfully affectionate without being unctuous or uneasy. Occasionally, fryer oil from my pan would hiss and sputter. It singed my wrist, and when I scooted past you to run it under cool water, I noticed several small oil stains beaded down your front. We were settled into this awkward dance when you asked me what my favorite ice cream flavor was, and I brought me an exhilarating comfort, or a comforting exhilaration, to the knowledge that after years together, we could still unspool such simple details from each other, and that we remained committed to this act of unspooling. Rocky road, moose tracks, banana pudding, I like mix-ins. Texture, I told you. You nodded curtly. I've never had moose tracks before. After a silence, you asked me to pass the soy sauce. The next day, there was a tub of moose tracks in the freezer, a single missing scoop carved from its otherwise smooth surface.
Thank you, Jessica. Our next reader is Grace Fabry. Grace is a senior at the University of Michigan studying English and creative writing. Originally from Evanston, Illinois, she loves reading, hanging out with friends, and doing crossword puzzles. Typically, she writes short stories and has won a Hopwood Award for short fiction. Post-graduation, she's looking forward to hopefully getting a job in publishing. Welcome, Grace.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so this is a full short story from my short story collection that I wrote for my thesis project, which is called Roman Candle. And the short story itself is called On Sunday Leaving the Party. I was imagining that I was a bird. The window was open and the sky through it was blue. I was trying to picture flying up and out through it. At that point, we had been flipped over in the car for 5 minutes. I was lying on my back and I could see the ceiling. I could see up through the window to the sky. Next to me, Ava's hair was hanging upside down and a little trickle of blood was sliding up her forehead. She was still mostly in her seat, but like the rest of the car, her seat was upside down. The grocery bags in the back had all split open and their contents had fallen out. I didn't know if I was bleeding. I knew for sure I'd hit my head, but I didn't know how badly or how hard. Trying to think recalled a lot of light and sound, but not much else. The radio had turned off at some point, possibly had broken completely. I wondered if the car was going to be able to be fixed. I remembered pulling out a dent in my fender once with hot water and a plunger, pulling on it until it popped back into shape. We'd only been driving because John had asked us to go get ice and snacks. I started thinking about how I was going to lay into him when we got home. I passed some time like this, hanging upside down and figuring out what I was going to say, how angry I was going to be, etc. Ava had already had 2 beers and shouldn't have been driving, even though she said she felt fine. He shouldn't have asked us to go. He was going to feel pretty bad when he saw how banged up we were. Maybe we'd even have to go to the hospital. My head did hurt and I wondered if maybe I was concussed. The crazy adrenaline had mostly worn off, I figured, and the dull edges of pain were starting to creep in. That made sense. My neck hurt all the way down, my ribs and legs too. I tried to shift my weight and couldn't. The front of the car had been crushed, I thought, and had probably trapped me partly underneath it. I was noticing all these things like I was watching them happen to somebody else. I knew I would be alright, so none of it seemed to matter very much. People got in car crashes all the time. They popped the dents out of their cars and sued for whiplash and swore up and down that they were never going to drive again, and then they drove again anyway. Frightening things happened and then winked out into unreality. I did not belong to the category of people who were dead or seriously injured. An ambulance was going to come, and they were going to take us to the hospital, and we were going to be fine. I said some of this out loud, not to Ava in particular, kind of just out to the car. I was tired, and I wanted the whole thing to be over. Waiting was the worst part of it. I was starting to get cold, and the pain in my side was becoming more and more insistent, sharpening into a hot point every time I breathed. Shivering hurt, too. I sat with the possibility that maybe I had broken a rib and accepted that that was probably the case. Blood had pooled in my head and was making my ears and forehead hot. I could hear my heartbeat. I knew the metallic purplish feeling of a blood rush. This was like that, but more prolonged. I took deep breaths and kept waiting for it to pass. It didn't. After another 5 or so minutes, it was getting hard to keep track. The dashboard clock was smashed and time was starting to slide into itself. I wondered if maybe this was what blood loss felt like, if maybe I just wasn't recognizing it because I'd never felt it before. That was when I started to get a little afraid. Ava had been unconscious a long time. I turned my head slightly to look at her. She was bleeding out of her nose and there was a long gash on the underside of her chin. There was an awful lot of blood in her hair. Her shirt was dark with it too, and I wondered if maybe she'd been cut somewhere I couldn't see. The floating feeling of being separate from myself and from the car had pretty much fully dissipated by that point. My body hurt very badly. I moved my arms, it hurt but I could do it, and I touched my face, my head, my torso, trying to figure out if I was bleeding anywhere. My fingers came away from my forehead wet. I couldn't remember how much blood the human body even had in it. I didn't think it was actually all that much. Ava was definitely bleeding more than I was, and it occurred to me for the first time that she might be dead already. I knew people who had been in fender benders, but never anyone who flipped their car and lived. A boy I'd gone to high school with had died in a car accident. I was breathing fast, and the breathing was hurting me. The windshield was crushed, and pieces of glass lay glittering on the ground. If I crawled out, I would have had to drag myself through them. I couldn't even crawl out, I realized, because I still couldn't move my legs. I thought for half a second about paralysis, and recoiled so hard from it, I moved again, and pain shot up my back. But I could live paralyzed, I reasoned. That would be okay. I could manage being paralyzed. We could put a ramp in the house, and I could get a wheelchair, and I would make John pay for the whole thing, since it really was his fault in the first place. Ava was just unconscious. Head wounds bled a lot, that I knew, and often looked worse than they actually were. So maybe she was fine, and maybe I was fine, and maybe there was an ambulance just down the street that was coming to help us, and everything would be alright. I was very tired by that point. For a minute, I started to cry, but moving made the pain worse, so I stopped. Somebody was going to have to call my mom and tell her what happened. I wondered if she was going to be mad because Ava had been driving tipsy. I decided then that I didn't care, I just wanted to get out of the car. I tried to picture my mom's face, and then when I did, I started crying again. I thought about Ava being dead, and that made me cry even more. I wondered how long it had taken, if maybe I'd been unconscious and more time had passed than I realized. By then, I was heaving these terrible sobs that hurt more than anything I'd ever felt in my life. I started yelling for help too, screaming at the top of my lungs, because I finally had realized that if somebody didn't come soon, then I actually could die, that was a real possibility, something that could happen to me. I yelled until it started hurting so badly that I had to stop. I couldn't even remember where we were. We were on the freeway, but I didn't know where we swerved off. If I listened closely, I could hear the occasional sound of cars driving by somewhere above us. I had the sudden horrible thought that maybe we were too far down for any of them to see us. The road sounded far away. Maybe we'd flipped and then skidded and we were down at the bottom of some embankment somewhere. And if nobody had been there to see us, then nobody would have called 911, which meant it was possible that nobody was coming to help. I decided the best course of action would be to try getting out of the car again to see if I could get up to the road, but I couldn't even unbuckle my seatbelt, and the passenger side door was bent in at an odd angle, had been hit somehow when we crashed, and wouldn't open when I pulled on the handle. I tried to shove it in the other direction, but it still wouldn't budge. Pain bloomed wet and hot in the shoulder I'd been using to try leveraging the door open. I yelled again, this time directionless and hurt, more for the sake of making noise than anything else. I hadn't even done anything wrong besides getting in the car with Ava when I knew I shouldn't, and that didn't seem a big enough mistake to die for. People drove drunk all the time and were fine. I spent another few minutes yelling for help, but had to stop because I kept running out of breath, and then I coughed, and blood came up, and wouldn't stop coming up after that once it had started. I tried a few more times to get my seatbelt unbuckled, but each time was weaker and slower than the last, so I sat in the car and was still, and I didn't yell anymore. The only thing I could hear after that was my own breathing. Both of the front windows were open and a cross breeze was blowing through the car. The weather was beautiful, the sky clear and blue. Everything was starting to hurt less. I wanted to reach over and grab Ava's hand, but my arm wouldn't move. I was tired, more tired than I'd ever been, and I guessed that that probably meant I was dying, but all the energy had gone out of me by then, and it was easier than before to think about it, dying, as something that I might be able to do. My mouth tasted like blood. I was awake still, and I thought I'd try to pinpoint the moment that I wasn't. I wanted to catalog it. I was still thinking about the whole thing like I was eventually going to be able to describe it to somebody one day. I thought maybe it would be like a light going out and I'd notice a difference. I'm going to tell John what it felt like, I thought, when I see him again. But by then, the moment had already gone and I'd missed it.
Thank you, Grace, for that intense reading. Our next reader is Caroline Knight. Caroline is a senior from Durango, Colorado, studying art history and English with a sub-concentration in creative writing. After graduation, she will be attending Naval Flight School in Pensacola, Florida. Her previous work can be found in Xylem Literary Magazine and Wilder Things Magazine. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you, and thank you, Jessica and Grace, and everyone. I'm so excited to be reading with all the amazing writers today. I'm going to be reading 4 poems from my thesis titled Requiem Disco. Thursday evening at La Sagrada Familia. Nobody has more vacation homes than God, but his grandest is La Sagrada Familia. It's the kind of church that makes you say, "Holy shit," while you're walking up the steep steps of the metro. Pay €30 to stand inside. Pay 1 more to light a candle. Maybe there's some comment to be made there, but I'm not really like that. It makes you miss your Catholic grandma, the one who's still alive. Its ceiling stretched so high they've got mirrors on the floor so no one hurts their neck. A mural of painted rocks is on display from the nearby nursing home. The tall glass is all-encompassing, staining Caleb's face blue as he FaceTimes his mom and she prays for us. I'm walking alone, neck hurting, trying real hard to feel something when I smell her perfume for the first time in years. It doesn't take much for me to believe in signs, so I know she's around here somewhere. Would have loved the depiction of the pale Virgin Mary, would have felt a little too far from home. I read that Gaudi, having spent 40 plus years on this love letter to God, was hit and killed by a tram one night on his walk over. It was just some Thursday, like every Thursday before it. She would have thought that was funny. Always enjoyed God's sick sense of humor. Walked me up to my first communion, drove Meals on Wheels till her lungs stopped working. Didn't believe in hell because she always said it was right here on earth. At dusk, every time. Light filled, I hung suspended. Warm orange in a moment, alone, rare in being so. I was alone, I hung suspended. I knew who I loved for the way I left, the moment of my hung suspension. I did not wish you there, I wished to tell you later, with the lights on, warm and with the lights on. You take my coat, the night is every night, orange and warm, warm ordinary. At our kitchen counter, I wish to tell you, the night is calm, ordinary, I had forgotten. The Bud Collector. Cutting your hair in the cold tile kitchen, your cheek in my palm as I measure each side, I am struck by the intimacy of it all, by the weight of the way you trust me. In November, the beginning, we fold 2 paper airplanes and watch them sail slow and lazy, curl up and strike the ceiling, turn gracelessly to the floor. You take mine and place it quietly in your pocket. Movie tickets, grocery lists, a boarding pass tucked into the book I lend you. I watch you pen small pieces of me, gentle so as not to break my body. All of love is a prolonged goodbye. When the day comes, you'll be ready. This is my last one, Requiem Disco. I want to be alluring like a secret, but I talk too much. I write poetry and I share it, for God's sake. What could be more vulnerable than that? a white dove with its chest wide open on the dinner table. And in the end, there will still be enough left over for the dog. Dog leftovers, which is what I suppose I'll be when I turn 30. Hannah told me, when a woman turns 30, she is older than a man who turns 30. I have 10 years left before I'm a piece of dried fruit in the freezer. So I'm choosing not to believe her. It's a choice, to grab hold of this part of myself that still loves a world where fruit stinks with bad sugar, where women grow old, men wise, a world which picks me up and shakes me as I mistake the shakes for song and start to dance. Thank you.
Thank you for those evocative poems, Caroline. Our next reader is Francisco Fiore. Francisco is a senior from Ann Arbor, graduating with honors in English and minoring in playwriting. He enjoys listening to Joni Mitchell, me too, attending and watching as much theater as he can, and reading Toni Morrison and Joan Didion. He has received a Hopwood Writing Award for his short stories and had his play produced by Blank Space Workshop. He is also writing a research thesis about the political anxieties in Tony Kushner's play Angels in America. One time, he handed peanut M&Ms to Kelly Ripa and made her a new key card while working at a hotel. Welcome, Francisco.
Go, Francisco.
So my senior thesis is inspired by Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. I was thinking about who are heroes in our society. I don't know if you guys know, there's currently a bill that has been enacted into law in Tennessee that, I have it right here, it's going to take into effect July 1st. It says, it is an offense for a person to engage in adult cabaret performance on public property, and then basically in a location where adult cabaret performance could be viewed by a person who is not an adult. In their new definition, this is what they're enacting, that adult cabaret performance means a bunch of different things, including male or female impersonators who provide entertainment that appeals to a prurient interest or similar entertainers, regardless of whether or not performed for consideration. So this is real, and this piece of transphobic legislation was the inspiration for this following story. While the divas rubbed off their eyebrows in the dressing room, howling about the group of gentlemen who kept shoving $10 bills inside their pumps, Susan with the black eyes felt something blow up and down her arms like a razor. Intuition, she realized. In her experience, there was nothing sharper. It couldn't have been the air conditioning. Over 30 years spent fastening corsets to her blistering torso, hot gluing rhinestones to her clavicles, and abandoning any liaisons that threatened to burgeon had left Susan with the black eyes practically numb to any sensation at all. Besides, the air conditioning had been under repair for the past 5 months. Resolute as a cobra, she snapped her fingers and raised her left index straight up into the air. All of the surrounding vanities reflected her ruby ring, causing the dressing room to suddenly turn a shade of red. Only the high school girls who refused to obfuscate their emaciated boy bodies kept chattering. Everybody else stopped. They had performed at Hummingbird long enough to know that when Susan with the black eyes considered something reason enough to break out of her usual silence, attention was undoubtedly warranted. Right in the middle of tearing off their plastic fingernails, their adhesive loins, they flipped their heads and waited. Miss Susan, darling, would you like to share something with the class? Better reveal something quick, Miss Susan. Trade has the keys to my flat, and you know he's only waiting so long before he starts lurking around my jewelry and trying on my wigs. Please, of course the trade you pick up wants to go on cross-dressing, Candy. Miss Candy Tuft, you gave him the keys to your apartment after Begonia... Maybe it was Begonia herself from the other side, warning her through some opaque signal, but Susan with the black eyes felt the shiver again, this time on the back of her neck. Deadly. It lined up, if she thought about it. Begonia had never acquired the ladylike savvy for nuance and tact. With the ruby red index still pointed to the heavens, Susan with the black eyes popped her tongue a couple of times to confirm the message. Sometimes the heat ruffled with her instincts, but this notice was clearer than a hymn. The Puritans who had never attended a single one of their shows were coming for their necks. Even worse, they were about to implement intolerance into the law of the land. Lacking the gumption to reveal the presage to her sisters, Susan with the black eyes just shook her head and snatched off her honey blonde lace front. It became official the following afternoon when the governor signed a bill that prohibited, quote, male or female impersonators that, quote, provided entertainment that appealed to a prurient interest from performing anywhere on public property, quote, regardless of whether or not they performed for consideration. The Senate Majority Leader who introduced the bill explained that he just wanted to protect the children. The news traveled through the community like a 3-day-old milkshake. Some of the girls heard about it flipping through the radio, scouring for a song they could perform for an upcoming number, whereas others saw the article cutting up a newspaper for a gown. The following evening, Belladonna and Laurel Almond sat next to each other, brushing their cheeks and the tips of their noses with glitter while they retorted quips off of one another. Baby, it really is not the end of the world. I don't want children at my numbers either. Consider me a proponent of the stricture, getting rid of all the impersonators, which will only eliminate the little boys prancing around in synthetic wigs. Look at these lips. Only a genuine lady possesses lips like these, darling. Talking about restricting prurient entertainment. Not much that's more prurient than your eyeshadow girl can correct that crease, mama. Miss Belladonna, please define prurient right now. Go ahead. Behold, my reflection serves as my dictionary. She is a prurient woman who feels no desire to define herself, nor does she see the necessity of these arbitrary semantic constrictions. I am what I am. I am my own special creation. Both of the girls shrieked and clutched each other's arms while they cackled. Inane banter like this invigorated them with an irreverent flair that drove them to shake their pearl necklaces and purse their glossed lips and stride down the hallway onto the stage. They finished the show just before 1 a.m, at which hour the city bus was circumventing its final course. Laurel Almond still hadn't taken off her eyelashes or wiped off her contour as she raced to the bus stop, but she was 3 blocks away when she saw the 2 bright lights approaching mercilessly fast. After the bus had passed her, a little migraine started encroaching the corner of her left eye, and all the aspirin she had was in her bathroom drawer. Walking home would usually take her 40 minutes, but she was determined to lower it down to a clean 32. Her eyes were practically shut by the time she had turned onto the street where she lived, so it wasn't the spiral of red and blue lights that startled her, but rather the brief whine of the siren. Even as she heard a window roll down and a voice asking her where she was going, Laurel didn't stop. The urgency for some relief had confined her into her own world. Exhausted and sore, she was completely past the thought of explaining herself to anybody or justifying anything to someone she had just met in the middle of the night. She pressed the thumb to the corner of her eye and pointed straight ahead with her other arm. Still, the rumble of the car trailed behind her. The voice repeated his question, but now his words held the weight of a demand. My apartment, she said. Where's that, sir? You following me? Make sure the area's safe. Where's home? Keep following me and you'll find out, I promise. Don't want to cause you any trouble, just making sure the area's safe. Safety was none of Laurel Almond's concern. Dangerous women in the movies and their defiance had always spoken to her resilience that she hadn't seen anywhere else. With the precision of clockwork, Laurel smacked her bottom. Eat my ass! Sitting handcuffed in the back of the police car, Laurel's head was throbbing, not only from her ballooning migraine, but also from her determination to figure out where she had seen this police officer before. Finally, she remembered sitting inside the gymnasium for a homecoming rally her junior year of high school and watching this boy named Jim or James parade around with an orange nylon wig and incessantly rub the brassiere underneath his cropped up top. Homecoming court cross-dressing for school spirit had long been a beloved tradition. While the new police officer explained to his chief that the female impersonator was performing prurient entertainment on public property and had even invited him over for intercourse, Laurel almost vomited, not only from the migraine, but from the homecoming memory looping around in her head. In the next 2 days, Daisy was arrested for kissing a first date outside an Italian restaurant where a mother and son were slurping their linguine, and Morning Glory was detained for dropping off her daughter at her last day of elementary school. A teacher had called the police because Morning Glory was wearing 4-inch shorts on the hottest day of the year. When she started berating the police chief about the absurdity of the detainment, he just sighed and explained that it didn't matter whether or not they were performing for consideration. Then he suggested that the gentleman just wear cargo shorts in the future as to not disturb the peace again. Thank you.
Thanks, Francisco. I'm glad that proposed Tennessee legislation at least inspired that work. Our next reader is Nikki Rossiter. Nikki is a writer in the most desperate sense of the word. She used to have big dreams, like wanting to be an NBA player, famous gamer, and even, at a dark point, an SNL cast member. Now she just wants to be a writer, which is perhaps the silliest dream of all of them. That being said, she's here now, a 22-year-old senior at the University of Michigan, with a thing for tattoos and birds. Welcome.
I might pee. I'm not a, I am a long-winded writer, so this is just a section of a longer piece. It is also thank you to my house. You guys, I love you guys. This is, like, the thesis is about, like, the concept of horror around the home. I have not experienced that at my current home. So this is how do I explain this? Almost like an essay. Like, the framing device is within another framing device. It centers around a documentary that details the dissolution of a family unit after their youngest daughter, Cassie, goes missing. The section I will read you, because the documentary runs sequentially from each member of the family, from mother all the way down to the two sons that are still here. I will read you Brandon, Cade's portions of the documentary, and then the epilogue. When we follow Brandon, we are always moving. He does not stop in any of the clips he is featured in within the film. Interviews taken with him at all times of day are only done while he is walking. He remains distracted, always shining a flashlight or scanning the horizons he has combed over, at this point, hundreds of times already. His nose is close to the ground sometimes, searching for tracks that are certainly not there after rains have pelted the Tennessee landscape for months. His words here are distracted. Something is always at the edge of his vision. All too often, trees are mistaken for Cassie. In an especially heartbreaking scene while he is searching in the middle of a thunderstorm for his sister, he finds her and envelops her in a hug, gasping and struggling to find his breath before viewer and Brandon both realize he is hugging a tree in the middle of a field as rain pelts the nature that his sister has vanished into. The camera and audio both cut, stifling ragged sobs. We see Brandon grow haggard throughout the runtime of the film. A wrestler in the beginning, by the end of the documentary, once tight shirts hang on his body and billow in the wind. His cheeks grow sunken and his eyes retreat into his head. His arms resemble sticks, and he has a look of floating as he walks over the steepest trail grades and scrambles over rocks. He looks like a corpse at the end of the film, and when we see him in a hospital bed during the epilogue, it's little more than an inevitability to the viewer who has seen every minute of his gradual transformation. Cade's edition is a baffling one. The young boy is only 5 at the time of the documentary. He talks about looking up to his big sister and wondering where she's gone. He spends a lot of time with his grandmother, herself all too happy to finally have company. She says that before Cassie went missing, the Mayers would hardly visit her, and says she's happy to finally have Cade, at the very least. He plays with blocks or cars and plays with his new imaginary friend, named Gracie. The phonetic similarity to Cassie is obvious. In interviews with Cade, we are given beautiful moments of clarity about the situation from the young boy. He has grown a lot without his family around him. Stunningly aware of his sister's absence, he talks about how she's likely in heaven, how she's probably playing with their pet dog, Spazzo. Spazzo had died a number of years before Cade was born, so it's confusing that he would remember him. In one interview, he stares into the distance behind the interviewer, talking about how Gracie's making bunny ears behind the cameraman. He giggles and laughs, getting up and leaving the interview before it's supposed to be over. Keen-eyed viewers have noticed the shoulder of his shirt bunching up as he does this, as if someone is grabbing him despite nobody being in the background of the shot. Cade, as a force in the documentary, is an isolated one. His island is not one of frantic guessing and searching for his sister, staying up late at night and fantasizing of finding her safe and sound back at home. His island is one of bliss. He understands that she's gone, but has already come to terms with her absence. Cassie, no more permanent than the objects in another room. During a shot where Cade is silently playing, we hear the raised voices of his immediate family and grandmother. They're talking about Cade, about how his parents want to move him back home. The grandmother staunchly declines, saying that they're unwell, that they need more time to grow and deal with what they need to deal with. The insinuation that Cassie is gone halts the conversation. A door is heard slamming, and we hear the last of Cade's parents during his portion of the documentary. In the mundane shots of Cade afterward, he doesn't talk about his sister again, instead talking from this point on in the movie about Gracie. As Gracie and Cassie become one, we know from the timeline of events that Teresa is breaking down on the other side of the river, Clyde has disappeared into the ravine, and Brandon has collapsed in the middle of one of his searches. In the final scene of the film, the Mayer's family is gathered around Brandon, who looks like a mummy swaddled with hospital sheets, emaciated and hooked up to wires and tubes. Doctors in recent years have been astounded at his ability to simply stay alive with the miles of walking he was doing every day without meaningful food or water. He does not speak, tears welling instead, falling without end as he stares at the ceiling, every second spent not looking for Cassie's torment for him. Teresa sits beside, stroking the son's hair that comes off beneath her touch. She's uncertain if she's going to lose another child as she holds Cade on her leg, gripping his ribs too tight as he sits on the purchase and plays rock, paper, scissors with who can be assumed is Gracie. A police officer enters the room and squats down beside Brandon. He speaks a few words to the teen and lightly pats him on the shoulder, nodding in affirmation of a young man's dedication. He slowly takes off his cap and whispers in Teresa's ear. She does not scream, does not whimper. She only nods and continues to stroke Brandon's hair. The police officer leaves, his boots trudging across the room with finality. Cade wins a game of rock, paper, scissors finally, and cheers in a silent room. The screen fades to black and tells us that Clyde was washed away in a flash flood while his family was in the hospital. Cassie still has not been found.
Nikki for a snippet of that very intriguing story. We have 2 more to go. Our next reader, our second to last reader, is Taylor Thorpe. Taylor is a senior, graduating this April with honors in English and a minor in anthropology. They most enjoy reading and writing about relationships between people, social environments, and how these both change through time. Increasing LGBTQ+ representation in literature is also especially important to them. Outside of work, they love spoiling their cat, new music, traveling, and roller skating outside. Welcome, Taylor.
Hi everyone. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm super excited to see how many people have come out to support us. I want to thank my advisor, who I think I saw out there, Julie Bunton. Hi. And also Cody Walker for everything that he's done for all of us. I am reading an excerpt from the 3rd chapter of my novella, which I'm revealing for the first time. The title is Shaking Time. So I'm reading an excerpt from the 3rd chapter. It is following intergenerational queer experiences in the South. So the setting is Scottsville, Virginia. And currently we're in 2008, but the different chapters range from 1950 all the way through to the future, 2030. So I'm excited to read this for you guys. Can I go play now, Mama? Candace asks. Her mother nods as she pulls her chair closer to the table. Just stay where I can see you, baby. Candace, already halfway into the field, yells back a promise that she will. The girl slows down when she reaches the edge of the woods, running her hands along the different tree trunks. She greets each by name. Hi, Florenzo and Flora, she says to the tall twin oaks. Hello, Bert, she says to the young dogwood. Nice dress, Coloretta, she says to the magnolia, half covered in crawling ivy. She reaches the maple her mom planted when she was born. Hi, Maya, she says, wrapping her arms around the narrow trunk of the tree. Candace looks up, resting her chin against it, and notices a small clump of twigs nestled into the crook of a branch above her. Oh, you have some guests? She asks, stepping back to get a better look. She crouches down to watch for a while, keeping still as possible and listening for the quiet, bell-like peeps of baby birds. Suddenly, she flinches when a sky-colored flash passes between the branches. It's the dad, a big blue jay, back with food to share. He leans over the edge of the nest for a few moments, and Candace finally hears the babies. She's mesmerized, especially once she sees a smaller bird, the mother, she guesses, rise and fly off. The larger one eases into the vacated space then and out of Candace's view. The girl jumps to her feet excitedly, proceeding to check every nearby tree for more nests, until eventually she hears her mother's voice calling, too far. As Beatrice watches her daughter looping around the trees at the forest's edge, she's transported back to her own childhood. Many of her daughter's favorite trees were equally beloved by herself at that age, she recalls, and she'd watched more than a few of them spring up from the tiniest of saplings. Of course things are a little different for Candace, she knows. The back half of the woods was sold to developers after Beatrice first moved out, for one, and the lately soaring coyote population made it unsafe for Candace to stray as far as she would have at her age. The old creek had dried up years ago as well. Her daughter never had the chance to swim in it. There's plenty more TV these days too, and cell phones, Facebook, and Nintendo games. Candace would grow up in a world transformed by technology, her mother knew, which had the potential to affect her in ways Beatrice could never totally understand. Sometimes she fears for Candace, and sometimes she feels jealous. Still, as different as her future may be, Beatrice finds it hard to believe Candace's childhood is much different from the one she remembers. After all, it's the same air around her, the same dirt below and the same sky above. How much can pick up sticks, hide and seek, and tag change over just a few decades? Her own mother probably played them the same way too, she decides, as Beatrice coaxes another piece of bread into her unresponsive mouth, her mother's. The two never agreed on much in life, though they could always bond over their love for the family home. It meant the same thing in the end, Beatrice thinks, to both of them. There was a time where she would have given anything to get away from home, Beatrice remembers, but dwelling on those feelings serves nobody. It's better to focus on the good memories, especially now. Beatrice's mother may not have always had the answers or been the best, but she tried to be. Her daughter believes that now as much as ever. Beatrice hopes her own might say the same about her one day. Looking out towards the field, Beatrice realizes Candace is straight out of view. Her heart jumps nervously as she stands up and calls her back home. At the first chance a few days later, Candace heads back to where she saw the bird's nest. Before she can reach it though, she stumbles onto a bunch of blue and white feathers strewn over a patch of flattened grass. She doesn't see a bird, but Candace wonders how it could have possibly flown away missing so many feathers. She picks one up off the ground and turns it over in her fingers a few times before stuffing it in the front pocket of her overalls. Carrying onto the tree, she reaches it just in time to see the smaller jay returning with food for the babies. Candace squats down and leans back on her heels, watching while the mother bird flaps her wings over her nest a few times. The little girl can hear the baby's urgent calls for food and wonders if the father's gone to get more. She waits as the brown bird settles into the nest and scans the treetops for a sign of him, but the male blue jay doesn't appear. After a few minutes, the mother flies down and lands on the ground in front of the awestruck Candace. The bird hops from side to side for a moment, judging the girl's threat level, before turning and pecking at a spot near the maple tree's roots. Candace watches as the little bird unearths some kind of insect, then quickly crushes it in her beak and swallows it. After watching her repeat the process again, Candace decides to help. She crawls a few feet over, slowly enough to avoid alarming the bird, and flips over a jagged piece of limestone half covered by dirt and tufts of grass. Centipedes and spiders scatter quickly out of the exposed hole, and Candace squeaks as she scoots backwards to avoid them. The mother blue jay disappears up into the treetops for a moment, but flutters back down as soon as she sees the squirming feast. Candace freezes, watching the bird quickly gobble up a few roly-polies and worms, then fly back up to her nest of hungry babies. Candace smiles when she fails to reappear, guessing that she's full. She stands up and runs back towards home, sporting grass-stained knees, only stopping for a moment by the pile of feathers. There's a little blood staining some, she notices now, and her steps slow as she nears the two older women by the back porch. Her mother notices the troubled look on Candace's face and asks what's wrong. Do mother and father birds always take care of their babies together, she asks. I think so, her mother responds. Sometimes they do. The mama bird stays on the nest and keeps the babies warm, and the daddy bird brings back food for her and the babies. You could say she sends them to the store, she finishes with a laugh. What happens if the daddy bird doesn't come back? Candace follows up, worried. Will they all die then? Her mother's uncomfortable, but she tries not to show it. I don't think so, baby. Not always, at least. The mama bird would do her best to take care of herself and the chicks, but it's not so easy that way. Candace takes the feather out of her pocket as her mother explains, and observes it as she tries to make sense of the situation. I know, the little girl says softly after a moment. She has to be really strong.
For that moving work, Taylor, for bringing us so close to birds and people. Thanks. Our last reader is Amelia Ferrante. Amelia is a senior double majoring in English and anthropology. She wrote and illustrated her first book in second grade called Scarletville Stories, which you can still find in Mrs. Bach's classroom today. Since then, she has pivoted to mainly writing poetry about weird little critters and her family. Amelia is also working on a research thesis in the English department about eco-poetry and climate change, themes which echo in her own work. When she's not writing, she's usually crocheting, consuming vampire media, reading, or eating green grapes. Welcome, Amelia.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you to Cody and Nick, neither of whom could be here tonight, but they're amazing. And thank you for coming in his place. Thank you to my partner, Sylvan, and to my friends in the back, and to my aunt and my cousin who surprised me here today. Very exciting. This is from my manuscript, tentatively titled Unity Update. Gonna wait till the last minute on that one. Misery Party. Your misery has polka dots and stripes. It comes with a too sweet funfetti cake. It starts at 8 p.m., but no one shows up on time. Your misery is garishly colorful. It has homemade papier-mâché ornaments. Its balloons hang half inflated. Your misery has sparkles that get stuck in the floorboard gaps. It plays music a little too loud. It gets sick in the bathroom after too many glasses of rosé. Your misery blows out the candles too early. It makes a mess in the kitchen. It leaves someone passed out on the couch. Your misery drips wax onto the table. It is wrapped in cheap cellophane. It chokes on cigarette smoke. Your misery looks clownish, and you are festooned with it. Culling the runts. The process by which one eliminates, when breeding snails in captivity, genetically weak offspring from a clutch of snails. The runts need to be culled, otherwise they suffer, in pain, their whole lives. This isn't a metaphor. The runts, doomed, grow slower than the organs inside of themselves. That's what a runt is, organs growing faster than a malformed shell. Every 2 weeks, for the first 6 weeks of their lives, the snails from the clutch of eggs must be culled. The best way to do it, I have learned, is to crush them. Freezing them makes their death slow and painful. Crushing them takes 1/10 of a second. Is the runt grateful? Does it think, thank God, when the bottom of the mason jar looms in the sky, lowering to swiftly and efficiently crush its body? Do runts go to snail heaven? Is the snail God a merciful one? Gastropods don't have brains, but they have nervous systems. This means they can feel pain. This means they have the feeling that made us make up a God in the first place. Over 2 million results come up when I search, can snails feel pain? I learned that snails have the biochemical capacity for love, but no evolutionary reason to feel it. I've never loved a snail, but I think I could be the merciful mason jar God of the runts, crushing a shell never made to be lived in. This one is called 3generations.jpg, and it is after Adelie Moan's My Father's Mustache. Let us pause to applaud the patterned pants, the sweater vest, the enormous white collar, the necklace and the bracelet. She sits in a metal folding chair, legs crossed, elbow resting on a small table. So elegant in her open-mouthed smile, mid-laugh. In this photo, she exists before I had anything to do with the world. I was so removed from the world then, but here I am, peering through my laptop screen, photos from the funeral slideshow, feeling somehow like I am the old one. Let me pause so I can mourn everything I didn't know. There were so many years before I existed. Sometimes I feel like I could throw up at the vastness of it. So much of you I couldn't know. I mourn for what my mother lost, and for what I lost, and for what I will someday lose. In photos, you hold us the same way. Parallel babes in arms across 30 years. I see it in your hand, in the way you balance us on your hip. I wonder if it felt familiar to you. Decades later, digital camera, sweatshirt instead of dress, sensible cropped hair, glasses new too. How much and how little changes with time. You're gone, and the loss is a hard pit in my stomach. I am the decades perched just out of frame. I feel like I myself am death, haunting the photo with the awareness of your passing. How could I not when I only saw this photo after? When I never got the chance to ask you what you were laughing at? Could you see me just behind the camera? But I remember I can't bring death to this photo. No one could. It's too full of the sound of her open-mouthed laugh. She has a great many years ahead of her. This last one is called Micrographia, or Hooke's Infinite Louse. Imagine infinity in reverse. Not the sky or the ocean, but the flea and the louse, the purslane seed, the white feather-winged moth, hair, feathers, bee stingers, seeds of poppy and thyme, cork and sprouts, kettering stone, sea moss, snail teeth, and silkworm eggs. The stars are confidently asserting their infinitude, innumerable suns for innumerable galaxies, but inside each tiny thing there is an infinity too. In threads of taffeta, a basket woven by a woman at the river. Steel looks like tree trunks, flint like mushrooms. In fish scales, one can find endlessly repeating seashells. Seaweed up close is a crowd of cacti poppy seeds like Petoskey stones. The humble louse, 6 legs, each with more than 10 barbs, scales and hairs and a bisected abdomen, is revealed to be all this time frowning at the world. In its frown, 1,000,000 atoms or more. The louse contains a kind of infinite smallness. How many infinite louses could you hold? Do 1,000 wriggling insect bodies cupped in your hands make you like the night sky holding stars? What stands between the night sky and the louse? Thinking that the midpoint of infinities, small and large, is ourselves, it feels like thinking the sun revolves around the earth all over again. We repeat ourselves. Thank you.
Weird little critters. My mind is spinning and sort of catapulted into wondrousness, which is a great point to end. Thank you so much to our readers tonight. You did a fantastic job. And thank you to all of you coming here to support these great readers. Part 2 of the Creative Writing Sub-Concentration reading is happening next Saturday at this time, so come on back. And thanks to Literati, 10 years and counting, 5 books.